Before dawn, February 14th, 1943. Listen. The Tunisian sky shattered under the deafening roar of German armor. You could hear the grinding metal echoing across the valley as the 10th and 21st Panzers burst through Fade Pass, slamming into American lines around Sidi Bouzid. Within hours, the engines of the United States 1st Armored Division whined and sputtered, scattered by a distant commander who never heard the actual thunder of the front. Getting popped one by one, the sharp crack of hidden German guns was unmistakable. On the hills, isolated American infantry screamed for backup over dead radios. Down below, burning half-tracks popped and hissed. Green American troops, deafened by their first real taste of combat, dropped their gear and bolted. For 9 brutal days, the rolling thunder of retreat echoed back 50 miles. When the guns finally quieted at Thala and Spiba, the silence covered 6,300 American casualties. General Omar Bradley later called the noise of those opening days the most miserable, chaotic sound in United States Army history. Yet, less than 18 short months later, the rumble of those same divisions would shatter the Germans in Normandy, roaring across France faster than any army in modern history. And with a metallic slam, they crushed the Third Reich from the west. They didn't just mimic the enemy's rhythm, they moved with a chaotic, thundering tempo that sounded bizarre and wasteful to European ears. Sometimes reckless, loud, and totally out of tune with what Europe had heard before. You and I are going to track this explosive shift. We'll hear exactly why American tactics sounded so different, what the blood cost, and the victory it bought. To recognize the deafening climax they reached, we first need to hear their quiet beginnings. The United States Army's baseline rhythm started with the Triangular Infantry Division, 15,000 men structured like a chord, 3 regiments, each holding 3 echoing battalions. Each battalion holding 3 rifle companies, a steady 3x3 beat, resonating all the way down to a 12-man rifle squad. Every note was intentional. Hard-driving General Leslie McNair tuned these divisions to be lean and loud, projecting firepower on 3 distinct fronts at once. 2 regiments hammering the enemy, while the 3rd waited silently, ready to blast through a cracked line or seal a breach. A machine built to move fast and strike hard, designed for the high-volume war planners knew was coming. By 1941 and 42, the gear these troops carried made a sound completely unique worldwide. Every grunt got the M1 Garand, a semi-automatic rifle that barked out 8 shots as fast as fingers could pull. Not a single other major military equipped their frontline troops with a semi-automatic baseline. The German Wehrmacht still cranked the bolt-action Kar 98K. The British snapped the Lee Enfield. The Soviets the Mosin Nagant. Patton calling the M1 Garand the greatest battle implement ever devised wasn't just loud talk, he meant every syllable. Think about that volume with me. Americans unleashed a storm of aimed fire that drowned out bolt-action rifles. That roaring crescendo won battles. Layered over the Garand's crack was the Browning automatic rifle, known simply as the BAR. Every single squad marched to its heavy beat, pivoting around that automatic fire. By 1943, the high-pitched whoosh of the new bazooka joined the chorus, a shoulder-fired rocket that finally let infantrymen, for the absolute first time, loudly obliterate enemy armor without calling for heavy guns. Mix in the cracking M1 carbine, rattling Thompson, and the chattering M1919, plus the deep crump of 60 and 81 millimeter mortars echoing down to company level. The American squad was, pound for pound, the loudest, most heavily armed infantry unit on the face of the earth. Backing up that frontline roar was a mechanical hum. Europe lacked an entire continent of factories. By 1941, America's industrial volume drowned out Germany, Japan, and Italy combined. By 1944, that manufacturing roar eclipsed the total output of the entire globe. The United States cranked out roughly 300,000 screaming military aircraft, over 86,000 rumbling tanks, and 2 million trucks. Every landing American division hummed with motorized power. Hear this clearly. Every soldier, weapon, ration, and bullet rolled forward on roaring, motorized wheels. Not a single other military could echo that claim. Despite the deafening roar of their famous tanks, the German Wehrmacht still heavily relied on the quiet clop of horses to drag their guns and gear. Nearly 3 million horses and mules quietly marched in the German ranks during the war. The American infantry was built for loud, fast, rolling thunder, supplied on a massive scale that planners listening in Berlin, London, or Moscow simply dismissed as impossible background noise. But the war America stepped into didn't sound like the one they planned for. When George C. Marshall became Army Chief of Staff in 1939, the United States military's voice was barely a whisper globally, ranking 19th, behind Portugal and just past Bulgaria, under 200,000 troops, holding quiet. Rusted rifles left over from the First World War. In under 5 years, Marshall had to crank the volume up, building and training an army of over 8 million soldiers, equip them, ship them across 2 roaring oceans, and crash them headfirst into the most lethal forces on the planet. Officers listening to the campaigns of 1939 and 40 and 1941 heard the German army shatter Poland in 5 weeks, silence France in 6, and carve violently into the Soviet Union over one deafening summer. The word blitzkrieg echoed through our language as a terrifying new thunder, engines howling, planes screaming overhead, and crackling radios pushing speeds that the old trench fighters could never have dreamed of hearing. So you and I must ask, how do you fight that roar? Their answer wasn't to mimic the noise. They wanted a different frequency. Down at the infantry school at Fort Benning, Georgia, a colonel named George C. Marshall, long before he called the shots in Washington, heard the fatal flaw in First World War tactics. Infantry troops were chained to dead communication lines and rigidly scripted maneuvers that ignored the chaos. When the plan shattered amid deafening gunfire, units went completely silent because no one below the top brass was trained to speak up. Marshall knew the fix was training junior leaders to trust their own voices and act alone when the radio completely cut out. To keep pushing through the noise, solve the immediate problem, and stop waiting for a commanding voice to tell them what to do. This loud philosophy quickly became the heartbeat of American doctrine, printed in manuals and echoed through every officer school. The culture it sparked wasn't flawless, and the message didn't reach everyone, but it generated a rumble that German commanders heard loud and clear after Kasserine Pass. The Americans tuned their frequency. They didn't just echo old errors. The commander who scattered the 1st Armored Division was silenced. Patton roared into North Africa in March 1943. Instantly turning up the volume on discipline, officers heard the cash register ring if caught without helmets. Discipline grew loud and harsh. Training screamed. Troops who fled Kasserine faced barking drills until the steady rhythm of cover and suppressive fire drowned out the chaotic static of sheer panic. Weeks later, the exact same men who snapped near Sidi Bouzid were making a totally different kind of noise on the battlefield. The booming victory at El Gaitar in March 1943, where roaring American guns shredded 30 of 50 German tanks in 1 hour, was the first clear sound that the shift was real. But the loudest clash for the infantry was waiting in the dense Norman hedgerow country. Listen with me. After the loud June 6th, beachheads were secured, commanders expected a fast, screaming breakout. What they heard instead was the bocage, those ancient dirt walls capped with thick brush, breaking the countryside into hundreds of small, quiet, deadly little echo chambers. Every brush line was a silent fortress. Every narrow lane echoed as a fatal trap. Whining tanks scaling those dirt mounds blindly exposed, their weak undersides to infantry listening nearby. All those calculated sounds of Allied bombs and artillery completely failed to muffle what the bocage did to our charging momentum. Formations meant to scream forward for miles were violently grinding ahead by just a few screeching yards at a time. The entrenched German troops, hardened pros who spent weeks quietly digging in, amplified every tiny echo the terrain provided. Machine guns chattered perfectly down every path. Mortar tubes zeroed in on every single gap. What do you and I hear? Anti-tank guns waiting in the quiet for armor to roar past. Listen, we infantry just improvised. We took German beach obstacles and welded steel prongs onto our Sherman tanks. They called it the Cullen Cutter. It let our armor smash straight through those thick hedgerows instead of climbing up and getting shot. Sergeant Curtis Cullen cooked up the idea, and we built around 500 sets before breaking out. General Omar Bradley swore it was the greatest invention of the whole damn war. All those combined arms drills we learned back in training, they finally clicked into place when we were bleeding and fighting through that brutal bocage country. A thick hedgerow, a tank couldn't cross alone. opened up the second we grunts laid down heavy suppressing fire on the other side. And when their machine guns pinned us down, we'd just wait to hear our tank blast that nest into total silence. As an artillery forward observer, I crawled right up to the enemy line to see what to destroy. Connecting our dirty personnel, close quarters hedgerow, fight to the thunder of every big gun waiting miles behind our lines. That observer system meant a single lieutenant, gripping a radio handset, could instantly talk to every artillery battery in the battalion, the division, or even the whole corps. My radio was the central nervous system of our power. No other military on Earth had a setup where one guy could squeeze a handset, make one clear call, and drop the combined fire of every gun in range onto one target in a matter of minutes. This power, perfected at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, a decade before the shooting started. It turned us from the battered kids at Kasserine into a force that could shatter elite German divisions with just a clear voice and a map coordinate. When our rifle squads pushed through that thick brush, they never walked alone. They were the very tip of our spear. Operation Cobra kicked off on July 25th, 1944. Let me tell you, that's when we really let it rip. I heard the roar of 1,500 heavy bombers. Then our tanks and boots hit the dirt. We shattered the German lines south of St. Lo in just one day. Germany's Elite Panzer Division, we pounded them into a smoking moonscape with artillery and airstrikes. It was so intense their commander, Fritz Speierlein, later said that when asked if his boys were holding the line, he answered that they were perfectly still and quiet, because every single one was dead. The Third Army, activated on August 1st, 1944 under General Patton, showed off our other major advantage. We were fully motorized, backed by a roaring supply chain. No other military could match. Patton pushed us across France so fast, we covered weeks of ground in a single day. By late August, we had freed most of northern France, crossed the Seine, and were burning rubber straight toward the German border. But you and I know speed isn't just genius. It was trucks. Loud, American trucks. Our 2.5-ton GMCs and little quarter-ton Jeeps hauled fuel and ammo to the front, way faster than any broken-down horse-drawn cart ever could. The famous Red Ball Express, a non-stop convoy operation hauling gear from the Normandy beaches straight up to our lines, ran about 6,000 vehicles constantly, dropping off 12,500 tons of gear every day. Black soldiers from segregated units mainly ran the operation, pushing those heavy rigs forward for 20 hours straight. They slept right in their cabs, waking up and driving the second daylight hit. Without them, our breakout stalls out. Their sweat saved our lives. Then came December 1944. The Battle of the Bulge tested us far worse than Cobra ever did. Hitler's Ardennes push slammed our weak lines on December 16th with 3 armies, 18 divisions, and 250,000 screaming troops. The sheer noise and shock shattered 2 of our divisions, sparking bloody chaos that felt just like Kasserine, but my radio kept working. Surrounded at Bastogne, the 101st Airborne held out for 8 brutal days, calling in artillery strikes from deep inside the siege. When a German officer walked up under a white flag demanding surrender, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe fired back just one word. He said, "Nuts." Exactly. Our guys held strong until Patton's Third Army smashed through the encirclement on December 26th, a roaring relief attack covering over 100 miles, in under 72 hours through freezing snow. Now you and I know the truth. Up at Elsenborn Ridge, the 1st and 2nd Infantry held the most critical dirt of the whole bloody operation. Listen to the deafening roar. American guns hammered out roughly 10,000 shells in one single, bloody day. By January 1945, the German offensive snapped. The German force, stumbling out of the Ardennes, had burned through its final reserve of veteran fighters, armor, and gas. It never recovered. You and I need to hear this clearly. The American infantry paid a brutal, staggering price. The military's individual replacement system pulled green troops straight from depots, tossing them into the meat grinder completely alone. Sending men as solos, instead of tight crews, became the Army's most fiercely condemned policy. A fresh kid arriving at the loud front lines, totally alone, knowing absolutely nobody, was far more likely to die instantly. They couldn't fight as fiercely as guys who had trained as a tight squad before hearing their first shots fired. Thousands of young men were killed within days of arriving. simply because the rigid system forced them into the screaming chaos solo. By April 1945, the deafening climax was easy to hear. Germany's defense crumbled from every possible side. American troops pushed across the Rhine at Remagen on March 7th, right after combat engineers snatched the Ludendorff Bridge before German defenders could trigger their deafening explosive charges. The final massive Western resistance shattered at the Ruhr Pocket in mid-April, as roughly 300,000 German troops surrendered. It remains the biggest mass capitulation in Western military history. On April 25, 1945, patrols from the 69th Infantry Division finally linked up with Soviet forces near Torgau. The entire continent was finally crossed. What shifted from the gunfire of Sidi Bouzid in 1943 to the Elbe in 1945 wasn't just victory, it was total transformation. The Wehrmacht divisions staring down American units during the campaign were men for men, tactically sharper. Their small unit leaders were elite, and their defensive maneuvers in rough terrain, like the Bocage, were incredibly deadly. Those enemy soldiers, heavily seasoned veterans of the brutal Eastern Front, held a deep, terrifying combat rhythm that American infantry just couldn't match. Colonel Trevor Dupuy calculated that German forces consistently bled out American and British units at much higher rates than they suffered themselves in most firefights. But none of it mattered, because the roaring industrial machine backing the American infantrymen was impossible for any single German division to silence. Tactical brilliance couldn't stop an enemy whose thundering artillery never stopped firing, and whose aircraft dominated the loud skies from dawn until dusk. Their endless supply lines rumbled unbroken, stretching all the way from American factories to ammo dumps, just miles behind the screaming front. A German soldier might win a firefight in one specific hedgerow, or hold off an assault on one rocky ridge. He could never defeat the unstoppable, deafening system that American represented. American infantry units during the Second World War didn't necessarily fight the most tactically perfect war across Europe. That grim title likely belongs to veteran Wehrmacht divisions, and they didn't fight the most calculated, methodical campaign. Either that was the British. They didn't launch the most ambitious operations, nor were they the most willing to absorb massive casualties. That was the Soviet strategy. Instead, they brought the noise of their homeland, a war of massive abundance, endless factory production, deafening firepower, rapid mobility, and a relentless, grinding pressure. A roaring campaign that only a democracy backed by the absolute largest industrial powerhouse in human history could have ever sustained. The guys making all that noise out there, most of them were never professional soldiers. They were ordinary citizens, fathers, sons, brothers, and devoted husbands. They traveled from every single state, bringing diverse backgrounds from every walk of American life. Kansas farmers fought beside Pittsburgh steel workers. Boston college students bled next to Mexican-American troops from San Antonio. And African-American soldiers from segregated Jim Crow units stepped up, fighting with an undeniable courage their own country refused to fully acknowledge back then. They were handed a staggering mission that no past generation of Americans had ever been forced to tackle, and they delivered. Over 200,000 American soldiers lost their lives fighting in the European theater. More than 500,000 were badly wounded. Countless families were permanently shattered in quiet little towns that history books will never even mention. You and I should listen to the silence now. The American Battle Monuments Commission guards 14 permanent overseas cemeteries holding over 92,000 fallen troops. Listen closely. The largest is the Normandy American Cemetery at Colville-sur-Mer. Come with me. Overlooking Omaha Beach, we see over 9,300 American soldiers resting beneath white marble crosses and stars of David. Every June 6th, survivors and their families return to that ground. They leave flowers. Listen, and you will hear them read names of the fallen age. By 2025, fewer than 50,000 World War II veterans were left alive in America. You hear that? We were losing over 100 every single day. Soon, that echo fades completely. But the story of American infantry in World War II isn't just a simple tale of victory. It is a loud, brutal awakening. A nation humiliated in the Tunisian desert in 1943, roaring back by 1945 to stand across the Rhine as the absolute dominant land army. It is the clear, deafening story of the exact price paid for that shift, and of the ordinary men, millions of them, who carried the crushing weight of that climax on their backs, trudging step by agonizing step across a continent already shattered by the roaring guns. They must be heard and remembered, not as cold statues, but as men. If you and I heard the same truth today, hit the like button. Subscribe to World War Declassified for daily videos the loud, real history textbooks completely ignore. Thanks for listening today.